Hey guys, it's Bella. Welcome back to another Mystery Monday. I hope you guys are all having a fabulous day. I hope that you had a wonderful weekend. What did you guys get up to? If you're new here, welcome. We talk about true crime cases on Mondays here. So if that's something that you're interested in, please come and join us. Come hang out. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any future videos. Today we're going to be talking about the case of Damien Nettles. And this case was huge in the UK, I believe, because he disappeared from the Isle of Wight, which is this small little island off the southeast coast of England. It's tiny. I believe you can drive from one side of the island to the other side in less than an hour. So in 1996, 16-year-old Damien went for a night out with some friends and he just disappeared into thin air. It's been 28 years now and there has been no trace of him, which is insane to think about, the fact that somebody can just vanish. Just like that, nobody knows. Well, somebody knows what happened, but generally, nobody knows what happened. They're just gone. There's been a consistent effort to try and figure out what happened to Damien from the public, from his family, which unmasked a very dark, very unknown side to this small little island. But there's still been no trace of Damien, which of course means there's many theories as to what happened to him, but I think it's really important to talk about these unsolved cases because they shouldn't be forgotten. You know, his family, his loved ones, they still don't know what happened to him, and his mother Valerie has been desperately searching for answers for the last 28 years of her life. She said, quote, "The worst thing is not knowing where he is. It's exhausting. I don't have a marker for where my baby is. I don't have a grave and I don't have closure." She also said, quote, "Finding his body or what's left of it, it would be a gift. And it might not end the distress, but if I could place him somewhere instead of thinking of every awful thing that might have happened to him and wondering if he cried for us." So Damien Richard Nettles was born to parents Valerie and Edward Nettles on the 21st of June, 1980 in Singapore. Same day as me, actually, like I'm a June 21st baby as well. We're very special people. Damien was one of 4 children. He had a sister named Sarah, who was 3 years older than him, a brother named James, who was 4 years younger, and a sister named Melissa, who was 7 years younger than him. The family moved around quite a lot because of their dad, Ed's job. He was an international sales manager, so they moved all over the US, the UK, Singapore, of course, around the time Damien was born. And then eventually in 1990, when Damien was 10 years old, the family settled in the Isle of Wight, which is actually where Valerie had grown up. Ed had gotten a job in London, so he would go into London for the week and then he would come back to the island for the weekends. They lived in the village of Gurnard, which is right at the very top of the island, the part closest to mainland England where all of the ferries would come in and out. The Nettles were a very close family. All of the siblings were close to one another, and of course Valerie and Ed just adored their children. They were a very tight-knit family. Valerie said, quote, "As a baby, Damien was just scrumptious and loving, an endearing child, a character. He loved his big sister Sarah and he followed her everywhere. He warmed our hearts. He was always a joker. He wanted to make people laugh. There wasn't a malicious bone in his body." Damien was described as sensitive, caring, and thoughtful. He loved to help people, whether that be friends, family, or even strangers, in any way that he could. He even went on to help his sister, Sarah, study for her A-level exams. He was shy and introverted growing up, and he was very passionate about music. He loved to play the guitar. He taught himself to play. He wrote lyrics, and he just spent a lot of his free time listening to music. He and his friends actually formed a band together, and he also played the trombone in the school orchestra. Toward the end of his time in school, he became a lot more academically focused. He really wanted to do well and go on to study marine biology at university. However, he would never get the chance to pursue this. On the 2nd of November 1996, at around 7:15 p.m, Ed Nettles dropped 16-year-old Damien off at his friend Chris's house on Grange Road in East Cowes. He was meant to be home by midnight that night. The next morning was a typical Sunday morning. James and Valerie were awake and they were getting breakfast ready for the kids, that sort of thing. 9-year-old Melissa was awake as well and she was playing with her toys, she was watching cartoons, and they were letting James, who was 12 years old, and Damien sleep in because it was a Sunday morning. At some point, Valerie can hear James stirring in his room, so she knows that he's awake, and so she sends Melissa off to wake Damien up. Melissa bounds down to Damien's room because, you know, she's a little sister. Little sisters love that kind of thing, waking their big brothers up and annoying them. But Melissa comes back shortly after, and she says, "Damien's not there." Valerie's confused because where else could he be? You know, he went out the night before, but he had a curfew of midnight and he was always very on time with his curfews. If he was going to be late, if he was going to stay at a friend's house, they would know about it. She had dozed off before midnight and Ed had tried to stay up until midnight, until the curfew, but he had also dozed off. But where else could Damien be? She goes up to Damien's room to check for herself, and sure enough, he's not there. And not only is he not there, but his bed is neatly made, so he hadn't been in the room at all. Everything was exactly as he had left it when his dad Ed went to drop him off at his friend's house at 7:15 p.m. the night before. So Valerie thinks to herself, okay, he's got to just be at Chris's house. She knew that he was known to sneak a couple of ciders here or there. He's a teenage boy. So she's thinking he's just stayed the night at Chris's house and he's going to sheepishly call hungover any minute and it's all going to be fine. I mean, that's what she's trying to tell herself, but something just seems wrong because this is so out of character for Damien. If he was going to be out late, if he was going to stay at a friend's house, he would tell them. They knew about it. So Valerie just had a gut feeling that something was wrong, but she was trying to stay calm. Ed was trying to keep them calm. She wanted to call Chris's house right away and check if Damien was there. But Ed said, you know what, it's 8:30 a.m. on a Sunday morning. If they had a couple of drinks last night, they're probably not going to be awake right now. Let's just give it a couple of hours. So Valerie spends the next 2 hours just pacing the house, looking out the front window, just hoping to see Damien walking home, staring at the phone, just willing it to ring, and it would be Damien. She does this until eventually she just can't wait anymore and she calls Chris's house and it rings for what feels like ever before eventually Chris answers the phone and he's very groggy. It's clear he's just woken up. She asks if Damien is there with him and he's really confused. He's quiet for a second and then he says no. I left him at 10:30 last night. We were both heading home from Cowes High Street. Did he not come home? At this point, panic really starts to kick in for Valerie and she asks him, what did you guys get up to last night? How was he when you left him? And Chris tells her he was fine. We had a couple of ciders last night, but he was fine. Valerie asks Chris if he can call around to some of their friends and figure out if anyone had seen or heard from him. And he says, of course, I'll let you know if I hear anything. As soon as Valerie gets off that call, she and Ed call every last person in their phone book, but nobody had seen or heard from Damien. She gets in her car, and she just starts driving around every last street she can think of, just willing herself to see Damien walking home or see him somewhere. But of course, there's no sign of him. Eventually, she returned home, and by this point, her parents had arrived at the house to look after their other 2 children, James and Melissa. Sarah was off at university, so she wasn't there at the time. She was on the mainland. And so Valerie and Ed headed out on foot, and for the next 2 hours, they went street by street searching their town of Gurnard, Carisbrook. They went all the way to East Cowes Town Centre. They searched all the coastal areas. It was a terrible day with wind and rain and gloom, but they still went street by street searching for their son with no luck. At this point, they knew that something was very, very wrong, and so at 3 p.m, Valerie and her 9-year-old daughter Melissa went to the Cowes police station to report Damien missing. Melissa was young, she was 9 years old, but she knew that something was going on, and she insisted that she wanted to come with her mum. Being a small town on a small island, these police stations aren't always manned, but as they arrived at the police station, it seemed they were in luck. There was a squad car parked in the car park, there was a uniformed police officer talking to a woman outside, but when they got to the front doors of the station, the doors were locked. They knocked desperately, they called out for anybody in the station to come and help them, but nobody came. Valerie calls the main headquarters of the police on the island and they tell her that nobody is at the station at the time. So she tells this officer on the phone, I need to report a missing person. My 16-year-old son is missing. The officer on the phone excuses himself for a moment, at which point somebody actually comes to the front door of the police station that they're standing out front of. So somebody had been in there ignoring their calls, ignoring their desperate knocking. But she goes in and she tells the officer that her 16-year-old son is missing, and she tells him everything that's happened that morning, their searches, everything. And the officer just says, okay, thank you, Mrs. Nettles. She says, so what now? And the officer says, well, you should just go home and wait. Teenagers do this sort of thing. I'm sure he'll be home by dinner. Another officer chimes in and says, you know what boys are like. They just didn't seem concerned in the slightest. And not only did they not seem concerned, but they were kind of rude. According to the Nettles family, the investigation was very much mishandled in the following days. Valerie, of course, was calling them to get updates, find out what was happening in the investigation, if they had found anything, and they basically told her, you're being kind of annoying. Can you stop calling us? Because of this, it was family and their friends, not the police, who had to go out searching for Damien, going door to door, knocking on people's houses, seeing if anyone had seen anything, if anybody had any information. Sarah came home from university in Portsmouth. Valerie's brother came up from Gloucestershire. Friends and family rallied around them and came to the house to help in any way that they could. And not one friend or family member agreed with the police that Valerie and Ed were overreacting and that Damien may have simply run away. It was all just too out of character for him. Valerie's friend, Dr. Corin Lawrence, was actually the one who found CCTV footage of Damien at a chip shop on Cowes High Street from the night of his disappearance. So not the police, but this woman, Valerie's friend, found this footage. She had walked up and down the high street, going door to door, asking if anybody had seen Damien, if anyone had any information on Damien. And when she got to this chip shop, Yorkie's chip shop, the man working there said, "We have a camera above the door, please feel free to check it." She did, and that's when she found footage of Damien the night of his disappearance in this chip shop placing an order. The family, of course, turned this footage over to the police. There were 5 other men in the footage at the same time as Damien. Police, for a long time to come, failed to identify these men, failed to speak to these men, take statements from these men. They said, in the footage, it looks like it's just friendly conversation, so these men are probably all unrelated. But even so, these guys could have had valuable information about something they had seen or heard about Damien or about anything that could have been going on the high street that night that may have been related. Now, police claim that they did everything they could. They claim they started their investigation right away, set up an incident room, dedicated officers to the investigation, conducted searches, spoke to people of interest, and I'm sure to an extent they did do a little bit of something, but I think it's a bit far to say that they did everything that they could, especially when you consider that it was a friend of the family who found CCTV footage of Damien from the night of his disappearance. There were 7 more security cameras on Cowes High Street as well, which the family had to push the police into gathering for evidence. And then once they gathered it, they somehow lost the footage. I don't even know how that happens, but there's obviously got to be a degree of carelessness to be able to lose valuable evidence like that. One of the tapes that they lost, they actually left in the machine and accidentally recorded over it. They also lost logs of calls made to the police from the night of the disappearance. Police notebooks were not retained, and they didn't even have details of which officers were on duty the night of the disappearance. Now, thankfully, they did manage to watch these tapes before they lost some of them and recorded over some of that footage. And they told Valerie, it's CCTV footage, it's really blurry, it's probably not going to hold up in court anyway. But she asked to see the footage, and they show it to her, and they show her Damien, the guy that they've been tracking throughout the CCTV footage, going from one camera to the next to the next. And that's when she realizes that they have been tracking the wrong person. The man that they are tracking, it's not Damien, it's not her son. And when she tells them that, they say, "Are you sure?" Valerie goes through the footage herself. She manages to locate her own son in this footage and track him from one security camera to the next. And from this footage, along with witness reports that they were able to gather, they were able to put together a timeline of Damien's last movements. So as we know, Ed dropped Damien off at around 7:15 p.m. on the 2nd of November 1996 at his friend Chris's house on Grange Road. Damien, Chris, and Chris's brother Davey then head out to a house party on the same road, and this house party turns out to be very low-key. There's 3 couples there plus Damien, so it wasn't long before Damien wanted to leave, obviously. It doesn't really sound like a good time for him. He got bored. Davey reported that he believed Damien wanted to leave so that he could go and purchase cannabis, but he couldn't be sure about that. And whether or not he did, drinking, smoking weed, it's pretty normal teenage stuff, right? Whether or not you did it when you were a teenager, whether or not you believe your kids are doing this, it's pretty normal stuff at that age, right? So Damien and Chris leave the house party at around 9:20 p.m. that night and head to the East Cowes ferry terminal so that they can head into town. Before they get on the ferry, they stop at a convenience store called All Days. Chris waits outside while Damien goes inside to try and purchase some ciders because he often got mistaken for being older than he was. He was very tall. He was 6'4" at 16 years old. So a lot of people mistook him for being older. Even the police did. When Valerie reported him missing, they said, "Oh, he's 19. He's fine. He'll come home." And she was like, "He's 16 years old. Have you even listened to a word I've said?" So he goes into the convenience store, of course, because he can sometimes get away with buying them alcohol. He looks older. He's very tall. While he's at the convenience store, he sees his ex-girlfriend, Abby, there. They had dated for quite a while. They dated for 18 months and they broke up a few months earlier in July. When she saw Damien at the convenience store, she said that he seemed a little bit drunk and that he had no money and that she had no money to give him either. After buying the ciders, Damien and Chris got on the ferry from East Cowes to West Cowes so that they could head into town. And as they were on the ferry, they were seen by 2 school friends who said Damien didn't appear to be drunk. He just appeared to be happy and in good spirits. They said, quote, Damien had obviously been drinking, but he wasn't drunk. He seemed cheerful and chatty. Damien was seen carrying a bag with the ciders inside, glass bottles of cider inside, and he also had a black camera with him, and this black camera has also never been recovered. When they got off the ferry in West Cowes, they first headed to a pub called Duke of York Pub, and from that point on, Chris said they just kind of went from bar to bar trying to get in. He would wait outside, Damien would go into the pub, and he would try to get served, which mostly didn't work. Allegedly, Damien was also looking for his sister Sarah when he was going in and out of these pubs, which is interesting because his mum, Valerie, says Damien knew that Sarah wasn't even on the island at the time. She was on the mainland at university in Portsmouth. At around 10 p.m, Damien is seen on CCTV footage entering Yorkie's chip shop. He goes in, picks up a salt shaker, says, all right, and then he just leaves. The 2 staff that were working there at the time said that he appeared to be on drugs. At 10:10 p.m, a witness saw Damien standing outside an arcade across from the chip shop. He was sharing a cigarette with somebody holding a bottle of cider. They both appeared to be quite drunk, and Damien appeared to be moody. At 10:20 p.m, another witness spotted Damien standing outside of the Fountain Pub. He had chips in his hand, he was on his own, and he appeared to be quite drunk by this point. Then at 10:30 p.m, the owner of the Fountain Pub said a young man came in holding chips and was told to go outside and finish them. They noted that this young man appeared to be under the influence of something, but that he wasn't drunk. At around the same time, so 10:30 p.m, Chris, who had been with Damien for most of the night, was ready to go home. The weather had taken a turn for the worst. He was cold, he was wet, and so he wanted to leave, and he tried to convince Damien to leave as well. He said, quote, I went straight home. I was 100% sure that Damien had headed up through the park towards home. They had parted ways at the steps leading to Northwood Park from North Road, but instead of walking the 20 minutes home, Damien headed back to the High Street. At 10:45 p.m, another witness who knew Damien said that he saw him standing outside the Midland Bank eating some chips. When he spoke to Damien, he said that he appeared to be quite drunk, he was slurring his words, and he struggled to understand the conversation. The witness said that he suggested Damien come with him and his friends to the Fountain Pub, but when they got there, Damien was denied entry. At 11:10 p.m, another witness said that a young man asked him for a cigarette outside the Harbour Lights pub. He then saw this same young man try to get into a blue Ford Fiesta, and I don't know if he was trying to break in or just open the door or what, but this witness said that he said to the young man, do you have permission to do that? And the kid just said no and walked away. At 11:20 p.m, the manager of the Three Crowns pub claims to have seen Damien walk from the front of the pub around a side alley to try and gain access to the pub through a side door. They told him the pub was closed, and he responded saying that he was looking for his sister Sarah. They told him to leave, and so he did. At 11:30 p.m, he goes back to Yorkie's chip shop. This is when he's seen on CCTV footage. There's 5 other men in the shop waiting for their order. Damien goes up to the counter and he just says, 1 please. That's all he said. It seemed like he was having some trouble communicating at the time, but he still managed to say his please and his thank yous. But he was having trouble. He couldn't seem to say anything but 1 please. He said it again. He said 1 please. And the shopkeeper said, what are you saying, mate? I can't understand what you're saying. And he responded again and just said 1 please. It was all that he could seem to say. He ended up having to point at what he wanted to get his order across. The guy that served him was a man named Rob, and he said that it seemed like Damien was under the influence of something, but it wasn't alcohol. He wasn't just drunk. It was more than that. One of the other staff members that was working that night, a woman named Sharon, said, quote, we can recognize drink. It was drugs. I'll play you the CCTV footage now so you can make up your own mind on what you think, but it definitely seems like he was quite out of it at this point. It's actually quite sad to see this CCTV footage because he couldn't even string a full sentence together. He couldn't say more than 1 please. And despite seeming so out of it at this point, he still was polite. He was still saying his please and his thank you. After Damien purchases his chips at the chip shop, he leaves and he walks north along the high street. At 11:52, the staff at Yorkie's see him again walking south back past the shop. He waves at them and he keeps walking. At around the same time, 11:52, a local bus driver said that a young man got on the bus. He had a camera with him, he had some chips with him, and he appeared to be pretty spaced out. He asked the bus driver if he was going to Cows, and the bus driver said, "We're already in Cows." He then gets his camera out, attempts to take a photo and fails to do so, and then he thanks the bus driver and gets off the bus as if he had arrived at his destination. Which, can I also just say, like, despite the state he appeared to be in, he was still saying his please, his thank you. He thanked the bus driver as he got off the bus, even though he didn't go anywhere. He thanked the bus driver, which is more than I can say for 95% of people when I'm catching the bus as well. Thank your bus drivers, people. That's all I can say. But I think it's really a testament to what a polite young man he was. Like, despite the state that he was in, he still said his please, his thank you every time, and he was clearly in a state. Because after this incident, at 11:59 p.m, this witness was sitting in his car waiting to pick up a relative, and he sees this young teenage boy huddled, eating chips. This teenage boy then approaches his car, says, "They're watching us." Then he walks around the car, wiping all of the water off all of his windows from the rain, and then he just walks away back towards the high street. Damien was last seen at 12:06 p.m. CCTV footage near Yorkie's captured him walking towards a bus stop and then walking back along the high street eating chips. He has never been seen again. Now, within weeks of his disappearance, police started to suggest a theory that he had drowned, that he had fallen into the water or he had jumped in and attempted to swim to mainland England, and that he had drowned in the process, although there was no direct evidence to support this theory. There were two routes that he could have taken to get home from his last known sighting. One route would take him through the park up to Sun Hill, and the other route would take him along the seafront, which was less than a 30-second walk from Cowes High Street. What the police suggested is that he took the route along the seafront and simply fell in or decided to swim to the mainland, and he drowned. But what didn't make sense about this theory is why his body had never surfaced. Damien's father, Ed, approached the harbour master, who at the time was a man named Master Captain Henry Wrigley, and he said, quote, "I calculated for them the tidal movements, tidal sets and rates, as well as the possibilities in case he had slipped into the water. The Solent is complicated, but it's also well charted. I'm certain that had he gone into the water that night, he would have been returned to the land." A thorough search was conducted by Wrigley and his men using their boats, but no trace of Damien was ever found in the water. Police, however, held tight to this theory, as much as the Nettles family and their friends protested and urged them to look into other possibilities. They wouldn't, and they actually went as far as to call Valerie and her friend, Dr. Corin Lawrence, hysterical women. It was clear that the family was on their own in searching for their lost son, and that took a huge toll on them. It took away such a large chunk of their life. Valerie said, quote, "As a family, we've been cheated out of a normal life. There's always this feeling of loss. As my children have grown up, I've been preoccupied with this case. I seem to spend my life in a quiet corner talking to people online because I am the person doing most of the investigation." So drowning wasn't realistic, and nobody besides the police seemed to think that Damien ran away. Not to mention, the ferries all stopped while Damien was still on CCTV footage on the high street, so he had to have still been on the island. And it's a small island. He couldn't have gotten very far without somebody knowing where he was or who he was with. So what really happened to Damien? It wasn't until 14 months after his disappearance that police started to consider other possibilities and conducted their first proper search. This search took place over 2 days on the 15th and 16th of January 1998, and it took place near the Nettles family home. 26 officers and 6 tracker dogs went door to door. They checked every shed, every outhouse, every flat, every house, every chalet in the area. They searched the woods and the bushes nearby, all of which had been searched the day after Damien's disappearance by his brother James, his father Ed, and Valerie's father. And it took the police 14 months to search this same area. They claimed that they were doing this search now because they had just received new evidence. This evidence suggested that at 12:30 a.m. on the night of Damien's disappearance, a witness had seen a youth walking along Byring Road towards the top of the street that the Nettles lived on. What was frustrating about this is that this wasn't new evidence at all. According to Valerie in the book The Boy Who Disappeared, this exact account had been given to police just weeks after Damien's disappearance, but had been dismissed by police at the time. So this search could have and should have taken place much earlier, but now it's been 14 months. Evidence could be contaminated, it could be moved, it could be lost, and nothing came of this search that was conducted by police. So once again, the police efforts died down. Over the next few years, there were many rumors, stories, people that came forward claiming that they knew what happened to Damien. There were stories that Damien's body was buried in the foundation of a block of flats on the seafront, that he'd been buried in a cement mine in Newport, that he'd been chopped up and fed to the pigs in the New Forest, that he'd been chopped up and put into lobster pots off the coast. There was a rumor that Damien was killed in a fire because he had tried to stop one of his friends from being abused. In 1999, there were rumors that a notorious paedophile had murdered Damien. Police actually did look into this claim, only to find out that he had left the island months before Damien's disappearance. In 2002, another convicted paedophile came forward to say that he had been involved in a murder on the island in the 90s. In response, police did search a field but found nothing, and it was later found that this man was lying. Lynn Hammond, a local councillor on the Isle of Wight who has followed this case closely, claimed that she had reason to believe that Damien and another boy had been taken to a chalet owned by two paedophiles on Gurnard Marsh, that they had abused the two boys, killed Damien, wrapped his body in carpet, and burned it in a blue car. To this day, this claim is still unsubstantiated. A boy from Damien's circle of friends said that Damien had fallen into the drug scene, was a victim of a sexual attack, and that he had been buried near Northwood House. This boy would later go on to deny that he had ever said any of this, but this rumor that Damien was involved in the drug scene is the one rumor that would never go away. And over the years, details started to emerge about this dark, hidden, seedy, sinister side of the island. Damien's girlfriend of 18 months, Abby, said that before they separated in July of 1996, she started to see a change in Damien. She said, quote, "I saw flickers of someone else. He was hanging around with a different group of people who were a little bit older than him. There were obviously some things he was keeping to himself. It could have been drugs, I don't know." After the breakup, in August of 1996, Damien started dating a new girl named Gemma, and she said that the police never even looked into this potential aspect of Damien's life. They never asked her about Damien taking drugs, about him getting into trouble. They never once brought up something bad happening to Damien. In 2007, the Nettles family hired a private investigator named Ivor Edwards. The police actually really weren't happy about this. They sent a police constable to his house to tell him they didn't want him investigating the case, but thankfully this didn't deter him. He spent the next 5 years knocking on doors, finding witnesses, and one name that kept popping up in his investigation was the name Nicky McNamara. Nicky was a notorious drug dealer on the island, and back in 1996, he was a part of a group of about a dozen people who would deal drugs on the island. He died in 2002 of a heroin overdose, although the heroin had been injected into his back and his body was found in a bathtub several days later, despite his partner Shirley Barrett having been in the house for days while Nicky lay dead in the bathtub. The coroner concluded the death was a result of an accidental overdose, but noted suspicious circumstances likely referring to Shirley's presence in the house after his death. When Valerie shared Nicky's name with her family, her son James immediately recognized it and had even been to a party at his house once. This was after Damien's disappearance, and James said that when Nicky asked who James was and was told that he was Damien Nettles' brother, he flipped out and told them to get James out of the house. James didn't think about any hidden meaning at the time, he just thought that Nicky was a weird, dodgy guy. He also said that Nicky's sons would taunt him at school. If they saw him, they would shout out at him and say, "What do you call fish bait? Damien." And James said he never told his family about this because he didn't want to upset them with the comments. Damien's sister Melissa also said that Nicky's daughter was in the year above her at school and that she had all of a sudden started asking her a lot of questions about what the police were saying about Damien's disappearance. There was certainly a possibility that Damien had come into contact with Nicky at some point. Damien's friend Chris admitted that he and Damien had purchased drugs from a house where Nicky and his associate Bunny Illis had lived on Fellows Road. Chris also said that Damien was open to experimenting with drugs that weren't cannabis, so he was open to taking pills and taking psychedelics. He said that Damien was the kind of guy that if you handed him a mystery baggie and told him it was good stuff inside, he would probably try it. So Ivor's investigations into Nikki found a witness who said that he had seen Nikki pinning a young boy up against a wall on Bars Hill at around the time of Damien's disappearance. He noted that this boy was quite tall, but that he could tell he was young, probably a teenager, from his build. One of Nikki's associates, a man named Daniel Spencer, was alleged to have witnessed this incident, but when Daniel was questioned, he denied having any knowledge of the alleged incident. There is a witness who came forward about Daniel himself, who said that when Daniel drinks, he can't shut up about Damien. And there was one phrase in particular that this witness always heard Daniel saying over and over again in relation to Damien, which was "no body, no crime." BBC claims that they spoke to 10 people who knew Daniel Spencer and that they all said they suspect Daniel knows something about Damien's disappearance. Another local private investigator also says that one of his sources claims that Daniel always refers to Damien as a little cunt. Nikki McNamara's partner, Shirley Barrett, told Ivor that Nikki and one of his associates had picked Damien up on the night of his disappearance near Byring Road, but she told Ivor that if he ever told anyone that she told him this information, she would have him killed. She later went on to deny having any knowledge of making this claim. Now, Byring Road is also the same road the witness claimed to have seen Damien at 12:30 a.m. on the night of his disappearance, prompting the 2-day search conducted by police in 1998. One witness claimed that on the night of Damien's disappearance, he had been shouting up to a flat in town on Terminus Road trying to buy drugs, and this flat was a notorious party flat. Nikki had been bailed to this address in 1996 for another offense, and the witness claimed that this conspicuous attempt to purchase drugs had angered him. In 2010, another informant reached out directly to Damien's brother James with information that he claimed he had taken to the police 8 years earlier in 2002, but feeling as though his claims hadn't been acted on, he decided to reach out directly to the Nettles family. This informant had been an associate of Nikki's in the 90s, and he was claiming that Nikki had killed Damien. He claimed that Nikki and Damien had gotten into a fight over cannabis. Nikki threw a punch in anger, unintentionally killing Damien. He then hid the body in a well-known drug den on Fellows Road, so the same flat that Chris admitted that he and Damien had gone to previously to purchase drugs from. The same flat that Nikki at one point was known to have lived at. Allegedly, Damien's body was kept there for 3 weeks before it was placed into a sail bag and then buried along a cycle path on the island. Valerie said that this informant's information was detailed, it was consistent, his story never changed, and so she believed him, and she brought this information to the police. This information prompted a police search, which included officers and cadaver dogs. They searched along a well-known cycle track from Newport to Cowes, but found nothing. On the 10th of May 2011, as part of the investigation into Damien's disappearance, a number of raids took place at a number of different addresses on the island. As a result of these raids, 5 people were arrested. Soon the search team moved to a new location, a chalet on Marsh Road. This chalet was owned by a known drug dealer and associate of Nikki's, and this raid resulted in a further 2 arrests. The arrest of a 35-year-old woman and 44-year-old man. They were arrested on suspicion of conspiracy to commit murder. Hampshire Constabulary's Major Crime Department, the Dog Support Unit, the Scientific Services Department, and the Island Support Unit searched the chalet intensively, but after 2 days of searching, nothing was found, and the 2 were released without charge. This event, however, prompted a witness, who was nicknamed the Weatherman by BBC, to come forward saying that it had triggered his memory. The weatherman claimed that in the days before Damien's disappearance, he had seen Nikki and he had been behaving erratically and told him that he was on a drug that he had never even heard of. In the days after Damien's disappearance, the weatherman claims that he saw Nikki looking worn down and weathered, and he told him, "I'm a damned man, I'm a damned man." Later that same day, he claimed that he saw Nikki burning clothes in an oil drum outside the chalet on Marsh Road. His story is quite detailed, and so Valerie believes there is some validity to it, but nothing has ever come from his statement. The other 5 men that were arrested as a result of the raids on the 10th of May were kept on long-term bail, but again, nothing came of this. It's long since been rumoured that Damien was buried in a copse in Gurnard, so basically like a little wooded area in Gurnard. A former drug dealer and associate of Nikki's came forward to say that he had been given information to suggest that this is where Damien was buried. He also said that he had seen Nikki and some of his other associates putting a large sailbag into his car shortly after the disappearance. Police, however, called this informant a time waster and refused to search the area because of this. So Damien's family took it upon themselves to search the area with a cadaver dog as well as a digger, but to no avail. And that's everything. That is unfortunately all of the information currently for this case. I would love to hear your thoughts, what theories you believe, because I think it's really important to keep talking about this case because it's been 28 years and there's still no trace of Damien. His family and his loved ones and his friends are still no closer to finding out what happened to him. And really all his mother Valerie wants is to know. She wants a body to bury. She just wants some form of closure. And I think what the most disappointing part of this whole thing is that the police really haven't put in any effort to give that to her. It really was such an abysmal investigation from the start. First of all, they wouldn't come to the door for her when she's desperately knocking and calling at them at the police station. They didn't do their first proper search until 14 months after the disappearance. When the family finally hires a private investigator, they send someone to his house to say, we don't want you investigating this, which is weird because why? If you're not going to do it, why do you care if someone else looks into this disappearance and tries to find out what happened to this 16-year-old boy? I mean, it really is just the most disappointing case, the most disappointing police work. I can't even imagine how the family feels. You know, they've lost so much of their lives to this and they've had to deal with this for so long. 28 years now with no closure. And I feel like we see so many cases like this where, you know, these families and friends, they know this person, they know the person that's missing. They report them missing and the police say, oh, we probably know them better than you, right? Like we know this person that we've never met is going to come back. I know you've lived with them for their whole life. I know you know them and you hang out with them on a daily basis, but we know they're the type of person that's going to come back. And most of the time they're wrong. Or in all of the cases I've covered, they're not right. They're not correct. And what's also frustrating is that Nicky is dead now. So it makes it a lot harder to investigate him as a potential suspect if he was the person involved and was the person responsible for Damien's disappearance and potential murder. But let me know what you guys think. I mean, also, if you have ever heard of this case, if you happen to live in the area, I'm going to leave all of the Crime Stopper and contact information in the description down below. Let me know what theories you believe. I don't even personally think it's worth going over the theories because the main theories are that he drowned. Don't think that happened. He ran away. Don't think that happened. Or this drug dealer theory, which to me seems to be the only logical theory that's been presented, really. And there are so many witnesses that have come forward to say that this Nicky guy was involved. There's so many witnesses that have come forward to say that, and that doesn't seem like a coincidence to me. Not to mention 10 different witnesses came forward who knew Daniel and said, we think Daniel knows something about the murder. That's not a coincidence, right? That's not a coincidence. But that's everything for this case. That's all from me today. I really hope you enjoy the rest of your day and hopefully I'll see you in my next video. Bye guys.